Hello, this is Heather again, and I'm going to post for the second time here. And I'm doing my best. I listened to the previous recording and laughed because it sounded very unorganized, and I used the wrong terminology, and I'm probably going to repeat myself. I'm following spiritual guidance here. This isn't something I would choose to post. In fact, I'm really uncomfortable posting it. It's not me. It's not something I want to do, but I am going to follow that spiritual guidance because I'm under the impression that there's a spiritual gift here, and I'm going to start to share it, and I'm just going to make my story known. One of the things I said in the last recording was I referred to a CEO, and I was referring to a CIO, and his name was Mike. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my previous position and what happened there. It was a couple years ago now, and it was so bizarre, but makes more and more sense as this information comes into me. And granted, anything that I say, number one, is alleged, and number two, I think I might, while I'm not going to change what I understand, the way that I understand things may change. For instance, in some of my statements, I said I heard information, and I'm trying to convey that I received information, but I'm not going to convey how I receive it. I'm going to keep that to myself. Some people just understand things. Some people hear things. Some people see things. Some people have dreams. There's so many ways that you can get information. So if I say, for instance, I heard something, I'm trying to say, here's what I know and here's how I understand it, and in a way that kind of makes sense. But if I come up with a word like here and I may or may not have heard it but just understand it, know that things like that are, I'm doing my best to get my story across. And that just goes back to not really having a whole bunch of practice speaking, but as time goes by, I hope to see that improve. My last position, I was a call center team lead when I left, and I was overseeing a call center of a small group of people. It was under 10, and it was a fun job. I liked the job itself. I liked the technical piece. I think the trouble that I had most were the other contractors that I was on a contract with, and the contract lead. He was called the program manager. His name was Andy, and when I first came to work there, my boss's name was Matt. And Andy and Matt were peculiar to me. I didn't understand a lot of what was going on at that place until I kind of received some information that makes more sense to me now. But it's big news. It's big news to me that things went this far or went to this place, and I don't like it at all. But Andy was the type of person that was always looking for people who had his back. And so if you had his back, he had your back, and you could just about do anything at that job, and you weren't going to hear about it. No one was going to give you grief about it. If you were in with Andy, he was in with you. And he had a couple of people that were like that. One was Mary, and another one was Matt. And Matt, who was the call center manager at the time, was not in a position that he probably should have been in for very long. It wasn't a good match. It wasn't a good fit. And for the years that he worked there, I just heard person after person say they left because of him. There were so many complaints about him or his behavior or something that he was doing as the call center manager that just drove people away. And I witnessed it myself. And, you know, I personally think I empathized with Matt. I think back to him, and I don't have any hostility or hate towards him. I just don't think he was in the right position. And I think he was handling things in an incorrect way. And he wasn't in a place where he was really very happy. This contract that we're hiring all these people had Andy, the program manager, working at the building, but they also were located in an entirely different state. And so, being remote, they had to trust Andy and anything that Andy said. And Andy was a troublemaker, in my opinion. He was into something. And I think Matt was too. And I think Mary was as well. I don't know probably everybody involved, but this is the feeling that I'm getting. And while I never really outright defied Andy or anything he asked me to do, there were some things I spoke up against. And one of them was the way that Matt treated some of his employees. I would speak up and say, this isn't right. This isn't good. It shouldn't be tolerated. It's wrong. And he did not like anyone giving him trouble or grief about the employees that he supported. And so I was not well received. But there's a difference between speaking up and not always being agreeable, but working together as a team in a workplace. And then there's just outright hostility. And at a government agency, it can get a little bit competitive. There's hierarchies of groups and people, and federal employees have great jobs. They're cushy jobs, and contractors tend to get paid a little bit more than the government employees, but they don't have the job security, and they take some pretty terrible treatment sometimes from government employees. And so being a contractor is not always an easy thing to do. Somehow I had ended up working in this contract with these people, and there was outright hostility towards me, and I don't know why. I didn't know why. It didn't make sense to me. It didn't add up. Usually when you receive that kind of treatment, I would like to think that it comes from somewhere. Like you can pinpoint maybe where it started or what happened. But the treatment I received was so hostile and so rude and so miserable from some of the other contractors and government employees there that it did not add up. It wasn't deserved. There was nothing I did to deserve that kind of treatment. And that was a situation. I loved the job itself. I spent hours working at that job. I was learning and taking in all that I could learn. And there was an employee that came in, and he was a government employee that started working there at that agency, and his name was Ben. And he was so nice to me. He was happy, and he was kind, and he was nice. And some of the other employees that I knew didn't like him either. And that immediately gave me a commonality with him. I understood. I felt like he was getting some slack for some things that he shouldn't have been catching any grief over, and he was in a type of disposition, like a happy, in my opinion, charismatic disposition that didn't deserve the competition that he received. And so there were times that, to me, he looked like he was miserable too. And he and I became close. One day he said, I was telling him some things about the contract, and he said, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that that's what you perceive." And did I tell him too much? I probably did. And he said, "Well, can I give you a hug?" And I said, "No, thank you. I don't want a hug." But the truth of it was, I really liked him. And so the next day I came back and I said, "You know what? I think it was wrong. Like, yeah, you can hug me if you want. That's fine." But I liked him, and our relationship turned into more and more talks, and then it turned into feelings, and then it turned into a relationship, and then I was engaged with somebody that wasn't a direct boss, but he was overseeing a project that I was a part of and that I reported to him for. So it was inappropriate to start. He shouldn't have been engaging, and neither should have I. And especially if he was a government employee and I was a contractor, and especially if he was in a position of power over me. That was not right to do for either one of us. And I don't know. It was easy to get into that situation because I was so incredibly lonely. I didn't have anyone else to go to or talk to. And I had come to the conclusion that I couldn't continue to stay. I couldn't continue to stay at that job and continue to work there in those kinds of conditions, whether the job was great or not. I was eventually going to have to find something else, or maybe even stay in the building but move to a different area or outside of the contract that I was working in, because it was so hostile and miserable in that condition. So one thing I wanted to do was help him before I eventually left and get him into good standing with his group and his team and his work, and just make him look good and help him in any way I could before I left. And so I did. I took that on. And I remember one day, he was being very flirtatious, and he said, the topic of intimacy came up, and I told him, I like you, but we're both in our own relationships and our own marriages, and I would rather not go there unless you are very, very serious and you mean what you say. And I don't want to get involved. I have other plans, other goals, and I don't know. I just think that's too far. And overall, he pushed for that relationship and came across very serious and made a lot of promises. And I really liked him. And our relationship went to more of an intimate place a couple of times. And then as soon as that happened, he absolutely cut off. He cut off, and I realized that I was with somebody who had lied to me. He turned into somebody I didn't recognize. He became very mean and very nasty, and I really didn't want anyone to know there that we had been in any kind of relationship. And I don't know. I was very quiet in my life about that, but he was not. And while I don't know, I mean, I'm sure he told everybody about what was going on between us, or his group of whoever he was consorting with. So I don't think it was a secret, or as much of a secret as I was hoping it would be. But what was really an embarrassment to me is the way that he would talk to me in meetings and around other people, and the way that he would behave, and some of the nasty emails that he sent me. I didn't like that. It wasn't his behavior it went from like a love bomb, which I should have recognized that, and I didn't, to like a Jekyll and Hyde thing. It was like he went out of his way to absolutely attempt to make our relationship together be nothing. And I was very sad and hurt by that. I really liked him, and in hindsight, I look back and it was like, oh, this is a guy that just, he said what I wanted to hear, and like I believed him, and I didn't take enough notice to see the things or the inconsistencies that didn't add up, and they were there, I'm sure. I just didn't pay attention. I wanted somebody that I could talk to and tell things to, because I was lonely, and it didn't turn out good, and I didn't understand what the purpose was of that. I don't understand. I think he thinks he's this great looking guy. I mean, he really thinks he's a catch. But when I looked at him, I didn't see a catch. I mean, I saw a great guy that I really, really liked. But that was because he was just telling me what I wanted to hear. And he was being agreeable. And when I thought we had all this stuff in common, he was just making it up. I was getting lip service. I think there was lie after lie that was coming out of his mouth. I don't know who he was, but the person that he showed me doesn't exist. And I mean, I guess that happens. Sometimes you engage with people and they don't tell you the truth, and they treat you bad, and you get disappointed, and it doesn't work out, and it happens. I mean, you gotta trust some people, and you gotta try some things, but that whole situation from the beginning was just one big no-no. Is they're terrible ideas, and it was not a good situation, and you know, it was what it was. So I dropped off from his team and put somebody else in my place, and I concentrated on the service desk lead role, and I was gonna continue to lead that and start looking for another job, because you know, at that point, I had no one to talk to, and I was sad. I was sad to have to go because, again, like I said, the job was great. It was the situation of the people there that were not. So it was interesting the way that it ended. I if we go back to my original boss, whose name was Andy, he had always ignored me, and we didn't talk a lot. And he didn't give a lot of direction, and I'm not quite sure why he put me in the position that he did. If he didn't like me, and I don't know. I don't understand how I got there. And I don't know if his dislike was from the beginning. I suspect it was. Or if it came later. That is a possibility. But whatever happened there, he switched one day and he called me on the phone. And what went to, "You're doing this great job. You're wonderful. Thank you for all you do," to, "We are very unhappy. I'm unhappy. You're not doing A, B, and C. This is unacceptable. How dare you?" And it came out of nowhere. And I knew that if I didn't leave that position, I was going to be let go. Because it wasn't ideal for him. And he would put somebody else in that position. Which is a shame, because I think I did about the work of 3 people while I was in that job. And when I was let go, I had a lot of people approach me and say, "What happened?" And some of it, I think, was staged by him to see what I would say. But the honest truth was, I don't know what happened. I don't know how or why. Later on, and I don't know if this is true or not, but this is what I have come to understand, is I was somehow, and I don't know how this would have worked, but I was in a position to possibly move away from his team into another position to where he and I really wouldn't be talking anymore or have anything to do with each other. And he got a hold of that, and that wasn't going to happen. I wasn't going to go anywhere but out. I was either going to work for him or I was not going to work there at all. So I don't know how that was orchestrated. I don't know I don't know who he told what story. I'm not quite sure how he justified a firing, but I was let go. And it was right in the middle of COVID, and I couldn't even apply for unemployment because the system was so congested. I qualified for unemployment, but there were just so many people trying to get unemployment at that time that I couldn't receive any checks. The system was congested. And so I had no unemployment money. I had no job. And I couldn't figure out what had happened in that aspect. But as I came home from working hours and hours, and I looked at my kids, I recognized that they were not okay. They were not okay. They were in their bedrooms or hanging out in the house because we were all on a lockdown, and they were not okay. I had my older daughter was very upset, and it almost looked like somebody had been abusing her or sexually abusing her, to be honest. And she looked like she just didn't have much fight left in her to even want to live. And there was a time we took her to the hospital, and the doctors were asking her questions, and she told them that she had suicidal thoughts on her mind. And my other daughter was not in any great condition either. And it was a blessing in disguise that I was fired from that job, because I looked at my kids and recognized that they were in trouble. Now, here's the part that comes in, I mean, among many. What had happened, as I understand it, is somehow my husband had reached out to Ben and Andy, and some conversation, this is what he tells me, but I don't know how this piece played out, or he spoke with them in length about how much he disliked me or hated me, and pictures were exchanged of me, and I don't know what else, but I think that he was asked to open the house up for some people to come into the house and drug me and attack me. And if he wasn't agreeable to it, then I would be told what he had done and how he was feeling and things he had said, and he would pay for it if he didn't comply. I feel like he was blackmailed, and I feel like some people came into my home, and when I say attack, I mean raped. I feel I was drugged and raped. That's how I feel. And I don't remember it, but something happened there. And I had been attacked as I understood it, and my children were in trouble. They were upset. I didn't know what was going on with them, but they were acting in a way that would be in alignment of them being attacked as well. And I was worried for them. And I had no job, no money. I had a husband that had just told me himself that he had really been abusive towards me. And then he took that all back. But I've never believed him more in my life. It was very sincere. And I knew our marriage was over. And I left him, and I took my kids, and I did not have anywhere to go. And for a couple of nights, we stayed in the car. I stayed at acquaintances' house. I stayed in my own home and asked my husband to leave the house, and I would stay there with the kids. But the problem is I didn't feel safe in that house, and my kids were afraid to be in that house as well. They kept thinking people were in the house, and I was thinking that was crazy. It didn't add up. It didn't make sense. Had they ever seen people in the house? No, but they were hearing things. And my youngest daughter was telling me, well, there's people coming in through the basement. And she was a little kid, and that just didn't add up to me. And so I went down and I was checking things out, and I realized that the basement door had been changed, like the entire door. You would think, well, no, it's just the lock, but the door didn't shut the way that it should or normally did, and the lock on the door was completely gone. I mean, the door had been changed out, and that was odd. So we couldn't lock the basement door because that had been changed out. And I went down and checked the windows, and I saw that the windows were unlocked. And I don't know how that happened, but that suddenly made her claims totally plausible. And I changed out the locks, but I didn't feel safe, and so I couldn't stay at that house. So all of a sudden, all at once, I wanted to engage or approach the subject at work of being let go for no good reason. I mean, there wasn't a good reason that I should have been fired. It was unjust, undeserved, unprovoked, and when I normally would have pursued that, when I saw the condition that my kids were in everything else came second. And I took them and I left the house because we couldn't stay there. And I filed for a divorce. And ultimately, I did not have a place to go with my kids that I felt very safe at the time. I had my mother's home, and I confided in her and told her what my husband had done, and she told me to work it out and get back together with him, which blew my mind because in her life, her husband had called her boss and, I don't know, said some things that weren't very kind, but it wasn't abusive. It was just inappropriate, and she divorced him for that. And the fact that she could hear what I was saying and suggest that I should go back home and mend things with my husband was, I mean, that was a very big eye-opening experience to me as to how deranged she was. And I ended up staying there for 9 months, and it was not a good time. It was not a good time. She made my life miserable, and she was rude to my kids, and she was rude to me, and we were fighting, and I had to get out of there. And this was all in the middle of COVID, and I had nowhere to go. So I had no money. I had nothing. I had no friends, really, because I had spent my life working. And I had 2 kids that were very hurt. I saw some inappropriate things that were sent to them and some conversations that were completely inappropriate. And I took their electronics from them because I wanted to keep them safe. We didn't have these things locked down the way that they should be. And in all honesty, I don't care who says what. It is so hard to track what your kids are doing online. It is. We don't have the security for that. Nobody can secure anything. There are major companies that get hacked, and we're supposed to keep our kids safe. And people can say they go to distances to keep their kids safe, but short of tracking every keystroke and every app and invading their privacy in a way that you just don't want to do, it's hard to keep track. I mean, you can put in antivirus, you can put in firewalls, you can put in tracking software, you can check your phones or check their phones, you can read their messages, but at the end of the day, you can't save them from the internet short of tracking everything that they do. And you either got to tell them you're tracking it and have them feel invaded, or you got to hide it, and that's not fun. And it costs a lot of money. It costs a lot of money for that kind of software. Like the last time I checked, it was $60 a month to track something like that on another phone. And it's not, I mean, there's a real vulnerability there. Eventually, I did give them back some of their electronics, and I still worry about it. I do. And if I could take it away and have them have no electronics, I mean, that would be a decision. But they're missing out on some major social situations with their friends because that is how everybody is communicating, whether it's Snapchat, Instagram, I don't know, games, platforms. That's how people or kids reach their friends, and especially during COVID. So it was such a shame. I think that's a big concern and something we all have to think about these days and worry about. But the way that I understood it was there were some cameras up in my home, and I didn't know how they got there, and then I had been attacked, and I had no remembrance of it, and my kids were not in a good position. They weren't safe either. And I don't know who it was. It could have been my husband. It could have been somebody else. I just did not have enough answers at that time, and I had no money and no place to go, and it was the middle of COVID, and I mean, I was absolutely destroyed every which way I looked. So that was a little bit traumatic, but a blessing in disguise, because I took a moment to see what had happened and where my kids are at and how much they needed me and how little I was there for them, though I did achieve a lot in the work that I did, and I feel I learned a lot. It was not a good life balance, and I could have been there for the rest of my life doing call center team lead. And it's not for me. It wasn't a job that was meant for me. But whatever happened there was very scary. And so when I had a husband that denied everything, and I had never seen or had an inkling of this before this moment, made me think that somebody or something else was involved besides him, and maybe he was a victim just like I was. Maybe he was telling me the truth. I had never had a reason to not believe him before that moment. And I had been married to him and known him for years. I mean, we were on year 13. And I would have just thought, well, I should have seen something before this. I would have. But the truth of it is I probably could have seen it if I looked a little tougher, but I was emotionally unavailable, and so was he. And the other truth of it is could any of this happen to me if he had protected me, or if he had told me or informed me or communicated or let me know what was going on? No, nobody would have gotten this far without his help. But he is also a victim in that he was not told everything. And so while he's wounded and attacking me, he's getting attacked as well. He doesn't know what's going on. And that is going to be something that I think is going to be a big regret for him when he starts to understand what happened. From spirit, it was, he gets one more chance, and if he messes it up again, you've got to go. And ideally, I should have never gone back, but since the kids truly missed their dad, and it didn't appear that he was attacking them, and I felt safer with them around him. That took a while because I didn't know. But I took them to counselors. I talked to people. I talked to them. And at the end of the day, it came down that no, their dad didn't hurt them in any way. And they missed him dearly. And I ended up going back to live in my home with him. And while we didn't get back together, we agreed that if we put our money together and lived in the same house, then our kids could have so much more than if we separated and had two of everything, 2 homes, 2 utility bills, 2 phone bills, etc. I mean, that takes a lot of money, and in Colorado, it's very expensive to live here. And that option, my kids didn't win. Nobody wins at that. Although we were in the same town and they could see their dad whenever they wanted, they were very, very upset that we were not together, and they missed him dearly. And they wanted to see him more often. And so I moved back home, and we stay separated, but we'd always been good friends. And I did come to love him very much as a person over these years of marriage. And he did wonderful things for me and his kids. And I don't know. I see that was a mistake now to go back. I think I had enough proof. It's hard. It's hard to separate your kids and make big life decisions when you don't have absolute proof, because kids are involved. But I think I had enough proof. It was hard for me to believe he would ever do something like that. So again, if anyone had told me what they saw and they had a responsibility to inform me if somebody was behaving abusively towards me, they didn't. They didn't. It seemed like one big group working together, and I paid the price for it. So, yeah, that's what happened. While I was at work, I should have seen the signs. I should have seen the signs earlier. Matt who was my boss for a while, he's always been flirtatious towards women, all of them. And he was in a position of authority, and he's a position of hiring. And I remember pushing to hire more women in the call center, and they hired this girl, and her name was Monica, and he was flirtatious towards her. He's flirtatious towards me as well, as like I think every woman that he encountered. And you can turn him away or tell him no, but she didn't appreciate being approached flirtatiously by him. And although she wasn't openly defiant, she came in and did her job, but she wasn't openly friendly to him back, and she didn't appreciate probably his advances, and didn't respond to it in a very nice way towards him, but as she has a right to. And that made him angry, and he was not nice to her, and every little thing she did was blown up, and it wasn't accurate, and he wasn't reporting things to people very accurately. She was doing a great job. She was doing wonderful in her job, and then I found out that they told her she could have the job if she got her A+ certification within a year of employment. And I thought that was very odd that they made that condition, because they didn't make that condition for the rest of us. And she did have some technical experience, and an A+ certification is not really a job requirement to go work in a call center. If it were a desktop and hardware position, I could see that, but none of the rest of us were given that requirement to be employed at the service desk. And I thought that was odd. And then, when she wasn't kind to her boss's advances, he had it in for her. And she made it so miserable for her. She really didn't want to go to work. And a couple of days she didn't go to work. And I didn't know the full situation, but she had told her boss, "Listen, I'm sorry I didn't show up for a couple of days. It's been hard. I'm pregnant." And between kind of his harassment and her pregnancy, she had just had it, and she didn't show up, and she was about ready to get fired. And they asked her to bring in a doctor's note. And unfortunately, at that time, she and I were peers, and I gave her the stupid suggestion of making up a doctor's note. Just sign any doctor's note. Make it up. And she did, because she knew she was leaving anyway. And I didn't want her to go. And I didn't think it was fair that she should go. And, they called her out on her doctor's note. They let her go. And she was pregnant. And I believe they let her go because she was pregnant and because she didn't appreciate her boss's advances. And I asked her to report it. Let the contract know, report him. But the truth of it is Matt and Andy both knew she was pregnant, and they didn't care. They just wanted her gone, and they illegally fired her. They should not have fired her. And because she had written that doctor's note, she really, there was a reason to fire her. And I wish I'd never given her that advice, and I wish she had never followed it. I wish she would have reported it. And if she didn't, maybe I should have reported it, or I should have left. That should have been my cue. Get out of this company. This is no good. But I didn't, and she wasn't comfortable saying anything, and I didn't want to tell her business to other people when she didn't even want to talk about it. It was, I felt at the time, her fight to fight. But really, when somebody behaves like that, a company or employees, and nobody does anything, that's an everybody problem. And these things just get worse, and they did for me. So I don't know. I remember at the time knowing well before I was fired that I would be fired. And so I cleaned out my desk. But I also knew that Andy was going to be fired in the future. I didn't know how, when, or why, but I knew he would not be staying there either. And I remember being so upset at his behavior and the way that he had treated me as he was the manager and setting the example for the rest of his employees to act. I was getting my things, and I took his nameplate down and just pitched it in the trash right below. And I was so disappointed in him. And he did notice that his nameplate was missing. And he asked some people if they knew what had happened. And he knew what happened. He knew it was me because I went to clean out my things. And he took the nameplate of the government employee that sat next to him as well. And then said, hey, our nameplates are missing. What's going on here? And just took it a step further. There was some ugly behavior going on, and really unscrupulous. And I don't know. Between a relationship I shouldn't have been having, and some of this behavior and lies and treatment towards the employees, and that is a very ugly work environment. And if you ever find yourself in the middle of that, get out. Anyway, I think that's all I have to say this time around. All right, thank you.